Aloha and welcome to this lovely afternoon in Hawaii. Today we're going to work on the practice what called digits form validation. Two things to note before you start doing this. The first thing is that this digits application we're building up incrementally, and basically for each increment of functionality I have you create a branch off your master in which to do it, and that enables you to basically just switch back to master if you ever want to start over. But when you finish with one of the practice files like digits form, which is the last one, what you want to do is you want to merge one of those, your kind of your best branch, or one of them, back into the master, so that when you start the next WAD, you're always starting from master. So just for example, if I go to the network graph, you can see that I was master, 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 and then I made a branch called form 1. I did my work in form when I only needed to do that WAD once to get a RX time, and so then I merged that branch back into master. Okay, and there is a screencast that kind of shows that, but you want to make sure that when you look at the the network, that you're obeying this. And this is a super useful kind of programming paradigm, or software engineering paradigm, or pattern, design pattern, process pattern, which is to do all increments of work in branches, keep master as the kind of the golden branch that's always working, and kind of has the best version of the system at any one time. So this is this parallels a very efficient software development process. So there's that. The second thing is to watch this validation screencast. Watch it very carefully. In fact, when you watch it, you're going to see exactly how to do this WAD. So you maybe want to take notes as you watch it, because there are some kind of obscure pieces of code that you need to type out in an appropriate way, and it might not be obvious to you at first. So that's good to do, and to over time some of this stuff will sink in. Okay, so what are we going to do? Basically, we're going to take our digits WAD and we're going to add validation, such that the client has to type in a non-empty first name, last name, and then a 12-character telephone field. The telephone field should not be empty, and it should also be 12 characters long. We could do better validation, but we're not gonna. It should be obvious to you by the end of this that we could make this as sophisticated as we wanted to. Okay, so we're supposed to start the timer. So we'll say start. And then we create a branch off our master. See, we're in the master branch. So let's create a branch called validate1. And we switch to that branch, so that's what we have there. And we're going to implement the validate method in the contact form data, make sure all three fields are non-empty, and that the telephone field is 12 characters. So we go up to our contact form data class, and we're going to implement a method that's public and returns a list of validation error. And the one that we want here is not the first one that, unfortunately, IntelliJ isn't perfect. It doesn't give you the right validation error class as the first answer, at least for me. The one you want is play.data.validation, not play.api.data validation. If you get the api.data validation, then as you continue to type, you'll find that it doesn't take the right kind of arguments when you actually try to invoke it with the appropriate stuff, and then you'll know to kind of check. But anyway, we're going to import this version of it, and then IntelliJ does this nice thing of saying, hey, wait a second, I don't know about this list object. Do you mean Java util.list? And actually, yes, we do. So we'll do an option return and then type return, and now we've got our java.util.list, and we're going to call this thing validate. That's important. We've got to call it exactly that, otherwise Play's not going to know about it. And then we're getting this kind of red arrow because we don't specify a return value. So I could say just return null for the moment and get rid of that, and we'll fix it up later. So what we want to do is we want to create a list of validation error called errors, and we're going to initialize that to a new array list. For those of you who, and then we want to import that from java.util. That's the correct package, so we'll do an option return. For those of you who aren't familiar with Java, we have these kind of abstract types called list, and then concrete implementations of that. There's a bunch of them, and if we just want a simple unsorted list of elements, array list is a good implementation of the list abstract data type. You can read about that elsewhere if you're interested. Okay, but it's kind of bogus to have an array list on the left-hand side, because essentially you're providing implementation details or unnecessarily exposing elements of the interface. The only kind of operations that we want to do on this errors object are the operations implemented by the list abstract data type, which is why it says list on the right-hand side, but we need to give it a concrete specification on the, it says list on the left-hand side, and we want a concrete implementation on the right-hand side. Okie dokie. So how do we do this? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to start checking our fields. So if first name equals null, or, whoops, how did that get in there? If first name equals null, or first name dot length equals 0. And we want this whole thing bounded in parentheses to make it a valid expression. Then what we want to do is we want to say errors.add new validation error. And that validation error is going to take two strings. The first is the name of the field for which we found a validation error, and the second one is going to be the error message that we want applied. Okay, so that's the if statement that we want to do, and actually we're going to want to do that for both first name, last name, and telephone. So there's a really cool little IntelliJ key binding option up arrow, which allows you to do that what's it called, kind of increase selection thing. So I'm going to do option up arrow. I'm going to select that statement. If I do it again, I get a little bit more. If I do it again, I get that block, and if I do it a third time, I get the entire if statement. So that's a really easy way to option up arrow, option down arrow to kind of, if you've got something you need to copy and paste, it has a syntactically smart way of doing it. So I'll do propeller C to select it, and then propeller V a couple times, and then I'm not going to be so smart here. Unfortunately. Okay, last name, oops, it's not going to work right. We'll have to talk about testing. We will get around to testing. Okay, for now we're going to punt on that because we just got so much other stuff that we're introducing. I just have to kind of spread it out, all the new stuff. Okay, and then so we'll say telephone is required. Okay, so that's essentially our validation stuff to make sure that these fields are not empty. Okay, then the next one is to say if telephone not equals null, and telephone dot length not equals 12. Okay, in that case we're going to say errors dot add new validation error telephone, but we're going to say telephone must have format xxx-xxx-xxxx. And I'll leave that as an exercise to the viewer as to how we could actually check to make sure it was those that exact specification, but it's just a little bit of Java string parsing to do that. And who wants to do string parsing in a WAD is what I say. Okay, then finally we have to fix this return statement. And as you recall, that what we have to do is if that errors object has nothing in it, we need to return null. We can't return an empty errors instance. Unfortunately, play doesn't equate that to null. So instead, what we want to do is we want to say if return errors is empty, then we want to return null. Otherwise, we want to return errors. I don't know. Maybe in some future version of play they'll fix this so that we can just return errors, and if it's an empty thing, play will understand that there were no errors. But at least right now, we have to do it that way. Okay, so that's our validation method. And then the other thing, of course, because we're good software engineers, we want to write a Java doc that explains what we're doing. So we validate that all fields are non-empty and that telephone field has 12 characters. And then we return null if no errors, list of validation error otherwise. Okay, so that's a decent enough validate method. Now we have to implement validation in the view. So for each control, so we go over here. For each control, we have to add the hasError CSS class if errors were found. And as you recall, what that means is we have to go to form group, and we have to say add a little bit of Scala. So we're going to say if, and then we're going to say contact form first name dot has errors. Okay, so if that expression is true, then we are going to insert the string has error into that string. Kind of crazy. But that's what that looks like. And at this point, what we'll do, I should have done my little crazy selection sort, but I don't know if that understands Scala or not. We'll put that in all our form groups. So we'll add it there, and we'll add it, whoops, almost add it there. We'll add it there, and then we got to call this last name so that we only get the errors associated with that one, and telephone for that one. So that's part of it. Okay. Oh, I see that I don't have my close string here. Okay, there. So now it looks good. So it does kind of do this funky, it does kind of understand the syntax enough to start underlining things when things are wrong. So you shouldn't see any underlining in here if you've done the syntax correctly. And then what we have to do is, after the input, we have to put this span, and the class has to be help block. Oops, help block. Okay, and then inside the span, we've got to say at, and then curly brace contact form, and then in this case first name, and then we're going to say error.map, and this is just, special magic, black magic here, error to error.message. I kind of went over what we're basically doing in error message, one more, I think. Yeah, okay. I went over this in the screencast. Basically, for this help block, we're looking through the error object, which is going to be some kind of list or sequence of the first name field in our contact form guy. And if we find stuff, we're going to map all of those, through all that list of objects, and kind of apply this kind of little lambda function type thingy here, which is going to basically say, instead of the resulting expression is not going to be this, it's going to be the actual message from those error objects, and they're just going to be all kind of concatenated together and put in that span. So that's what happens at the end of the day. So having typed all this stuff out once, let's copy it, and then go here, and then go here, and then we're going to say last name for this one, and we're going to say telephone for this one. Okay, now at this point, hopefully, what you guys are saying is, this looks completely ridiculous. There's like so much repetitive text in this page. I can't stand it. It offends me. Okay, so the difference between this form group and this form group, the only difference is that sometimes we say first name and sometimes we say last name, but all the rest of it is exactly the same. That's crazy. Okay, and if Play didn't provide a solution to this, Play would totally suck. Okay, to be frank, and I wouldn't be teaching it to you if you had to write code like this. It turns out that Play has, as a matter of fact, a rather elegant solution to this problem, but I'm not going to show it to you yet. Okay, in some sense. Okay, because what I'm trying to do is just get you to see how things work, and that's going to require a little bit of more typing right now. Okay, but later on, probably next week, I'm going to show you how we can get rid of all that redundancy in one fell swoop. And the thing that's so amazing about Play, one of the things I really love about Play is this specific thing. You already know how to do it. Okay, it's like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. At the end, she finds out she was wearing the ruby slippers, and she knew how to go. She had the power to go home all the time that she was going through Oz. She just didn't know yet how to do it, or she wasn't ready to do it yet. So a little bit like that. Right now you're Dorothy, you're wearing the ruby slippers, you in fact know everything you need to know to get rid of this redundancy, but you just haven't recognized it yet. Okay? Next week I'm going to show you how you do it, and you'll go, oh my lord, that is just crazy elegant. Alright? So anyway, but for right now, we got all this redundancy. It looks bad, I agree, I don't like it either, but we're just going to kind of go with the flow, for a few days longer, and kind of test manually to make sure that there aren't any typos in here. So it's not good, but help is on the way. Okay, so the final thing we have to do is we look over here. So we've fixed the view. Now we have to check for validation problems in the controller. So we're going to go here, and what we learned in the screencast is that after this bind from request, what we're going to do is we're going to say if that form data object has errors. Okay? Then what we're going to do is, just for fun, we can do a system out print line and say found errors. Don't have to do this. You won't want to do this after you get a little more experience, but the very first time you're writing this code, you might as well just print some stuff out to kind of convince yourself of what's actually happening. And then you want to return a bad request, okay, with, and you're going to say new contact dot render with form data. Okay, and so as we talked about in the screencast, what's happening during this bind request is it's going to run that validation method, and it's going to basically annotate this form data object, or it's basically going to, the form data object that gets created is going to have all those validation error thingies attached to it if the validation method found problems. Okay, so we're just testing here to see whether or not there are any validation errors. If so, it's going to return that object with those validation errors attached back into the view where they will be extracted and displayed back to the user along with their original data. Super, pretty cool, really. Okay? So that's all that means. All right? And then what we'll say is else, okay? And then we'll use our Control-Alt-I to fix the indentation. And look how the cursor goes on to the next one. So we can just do Control-Alt-I again. And then we've got a little bit of, we need an extra curly brace. Okay. And again, just to review, as we said before, you can't call this get method if any errors were found. That's why you have to immediately check to see if there's has errors and do basically return out of this thing before you actually execute this code. Otherwise you get problems. Okay, so there's our system. One thing we could do is we could do a command F9 to make it, and just see if in IntelliJ it sees any problems. Okay, so that's a good news. So it looks fine. So we'll say activate run, activator run. Okay, which and that would have run the compiler too and showed us errors, but it's kind of nice to know you can do IntelliJ. All right, so now we have our system. And if we say, here's our new contact, if we say add, okay, without fulfilling anything, we see if things get read, first name, last name, telephone is required. Let's fix first name. Okay, first name's good. Let's fix last name. Okay, last name is good. Let's fix digits, not really. And now we get the second error, and then we'll say 333, 333, 222, 22222, 2D2D, 2222. And everything's good. Okay? So we've tested the code by clicking the add button. Everything looks good. We're at, so the last thing it's asking us to do is, oh heck, we always got to run check style. Let's just do that as a kind of an extra bonus here. And see, it found something. Contact form data. Go there. Oh, preceded by. Oh, that should be against there. And in routes.java, routes missing package. This is so interesting. Okay, that is a issue I have. I had just fixed the red underline in application by adding some stuff to sources, and now checkstyle is complaining about stuff in routes.java, which we cannot fix because we don't actually even generate that routes.java class. So I will work on this. This is not a problem. I'm so glad I did that. But anyway, let's Shift I. We'll run it again. Okay. So what I got to do now is I got to figure out how we can get rid of the red underline in application and not have problems with the routes.java. So I will worry about that. You don't have to worry about that. That's not an issue that, it does pass check style, at least all the code that we've written. So all we have to do now is go back here and say finished form validation WAD. And we'll call it, it's 21 minutes, but we kind of had that problem with check style that was, now we'll call it 21 minutes. What the heck? That gives you a chance to make a little error and still get RX time. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this. We're moving along with play, adding the complexity. It's going to get a little more complicated, but then we're going to start seeing ways to actually make our code more concise, more simple, more clean. I think you're really going to like it when we get all the way through.